In March 1967, the American Army went looking for a fight in War Zone C. They cut a clearing out of the jungle 90 kilometers northwest of Saigon, dropped in 2 battalions and called it Fire Support Base Gold. The plan was simple. Hold this patch of dirt, support the search and destroy sweeps fanning out around it, and dare the enemy to come. The enemy came. Around 2,500 of them before dawn on March 21st. By the time the sun was fully up, more than 600 of those men were dead, stacked in the trees and across a dry rice paddy 300 meters wide. The Americans counted 31 of their own killed. It was the worst single defeat the Viet Cong suffered in Vietnam that year, and it happened because a regiment looked at a half-finished firebase and thought it had found an easy kill. This is what was actually waiting inside the wire. Tay Ninh province sits in the far western corner of South Vietnam, with the Cambodian border running along its edge like a fence with a hole in it. The enemy could cross that border. American ground troops, by the rules of the war, could not. So the trail networks and base camps of War Zone C became a kind of safe harbor, a place where main force units rested, resupplied, and planned. Operation Junction City was meant to break that harbor open. Tens of thousands of American troops pushed into the country the Viet Cong had owned for years. If you're enjoying this story so far, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe. Drop a comment telling me where in the world you're watching from. I love hearing from you. Fire Support Base Gold was one piece of that push. On March 19th, helicopters of the 3rd Brigade, 4th Infantry Division came down into a small egg-shaped clearing near the abandoned village of Suoi Tre. The ground had been scarred by defoliants, ringed by sparse woodland, roughly 300 by 400 meters of open dry paddy. Heavy resistance was not expected. The area had been quiet. The landing said otherwise. Viet Cong scouts had been watching the clearing. Before the first lift even touched down, they set off command-detonated mines they had buried facing inward into the open ground where the helicopters would land. 3 Hueys were destroyed in the blasts. One soldier on the 5th chopper later described the aircraft in front of him exploding 15 feet in the air, the concussion throwing him out of his own ship and slamming him into the dirt with his helmet gone and his rifle buried in the mud. Snipers opened up from the tree line. The Americans fired back into the woods, gathered their dead, and kept building the base. What they did not know was the size of what they had landed on top of. Spread through the surrounding jungle were close to 2,000 troops of the 272nd Main Force Regiment of the 9th Viet Cong Division, not local guerrillas. A trained, experienced main force formation, the kind that fought set-piece battles. The Americans had built their firebase, more or less by accident, on the doorstep of an entire regiment. For 2 days the enemy watched and counted. By March 20th, the base was actually weaker than it looked. The 2nd Battalion, 12th Infantry had moved out west on a search and destroy sweep. The mechanized 2nd Battalion, 22nd Infantry and the armor of the 2nd Battalion, 34th Armor were south of the position, trying to cross the Sui Samat River to link up. That left fewer than 450 Americans actually holding Fire Support Base Gold. The 3rd Battalion, 22nd Infantry under Lieutenant Colonel John Bender, missing one of its companies, and the gunners of the 2nd Battalion, 77th Artillery under Lieutenant Colonel John Vesey. That afternoon, the brigade commander, Colonel Marshal Garth, spotted something through his binoculars. 30 to 35 Viet Cong out in the open, 2 kilometers southwest of the base. He called artillery down on them and put every unit on alert. A handful of enemy in daylight, this close to the wire, was not an accident. It was a measurement. The men inside Gold spent that night waiting. First light on March 21st came with a standtook, standard procedure, every man up and in his position. A security patrol from the 3rd of the 22nd moved out to sweep the perimeter. They walked straight into the enemy assembling for the attack. That contact triggered everything early. At 0640 hours, the mortars came first. A heavy coordinated barrage, not harassing fire but a prepared bombardment dropping rounds across the position. Minutes later, the ground assault hit from the north, the east and the south at once. This was the 272nd Regiment reinforced by 2 more battalions, roughly 2,500 men, supported by their own artillery, throwing themselves at a perimeter held by fewer than 450. The weight of it was enormous. The eastern and southern sectors took the worst of the first rush. Viet Cong infantry came in waves across the open paddy, some of them carrying wounded comrades forward into follow-up charges, pressing in close where American supporting fires would be hardest to use. Parts of the perimeter buckled. The defenders were forced to give ground, pulling back toward the center, and for a stretch of that morning it genuinely looked like Gold might be overrun the way other isolated bases had been before it. Then the artillery did something the enemy had not planned for. The 2nd of the 77th had 11 105 howitzers inside that perimeter. In a normal fight, those guns lob shells up and over, miles out, called in by an observer. That morning, with the enemy inside the wire and pouring across the open ground, the gun crews cranked their tubes down level and fired straight into the attacking infantry. And they were not firing high explosive, they were firing beehives. A beehive round is a howitzer shell packed with thousands of steel flechettes, little thin darts about the size of a finishing nail. A mechanical fuse ejects them in a spreading fan. One round turns a cannon into a shotgun the size of a car, throwing thousands of darts into anything in front of the barrel. The crews fired them point blank, the muzzles depressed almost to the dirt, into men charging across paddy from less than 200 meters out. When the enemy directed anti-tank fire onto the gun positions and damaged the howitzers, the crews stayed on them. They repaired the guns under fire and kept shooting. At several points along the line, artillerymen were fighting as infantry 1 minute and dropping beehives into a charge the next. These were not riflemen, they were gun bunnies who refused to leave their pieces, and the gun line held the part of the perimeter that should have broken. If you're hooked on this story, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss an upload. Your support means everything and helps me bring you more emotional stories like this one. Overhead, the air war stacked on top of the ground war. Forward air controllers brought in tactical fighters that dropped napalm and bombs on the enemy assembly areas in the woodlines feeding the assault. Helicopter gunships worked the open ground. The men crossing that paddy were caught between direct artillery fire in front of them, machine guns and rifles along the perimeter, and aircraft tearing into the tree lines they were staging from. But the enemy did not break. They kept coming. By mid-morning, the fight had been raging for the better part of 2 hours, and the defenders of Gold were running low on the one thing that mattered, which was time. A perimeter that's small, that outnumbered, can only absorb so many waves before the math turns against it, no matter how good the fire support is. What saved fire support base Gold was not inside the wire, it was coming up from the south. When the attack started, the relief was kilometers away on the wrong side of the Suez-Samat River. The mechanized infantry of the 2nd of the 22nd and the tanks and armored personnel carriers of the 2nd of the 34th Armor heard Gold under assault and turned toward the sound of the guns. They forced their way across the river. They smashed through jungle that Armor was not supposed to be able to move through, the tracks knocking down trees, the column driving hard toward a fight it could hear but not yet see. The 2nd of the 12th Infantry, out on its sweep to the west, also turned and pushed back toward the base. The armored column broke out of the tree line behind the Viet Cong, who were still pressing the attack on Gold. The enemy, focused on the perimeter in front of them, suddenly had tanks and tracks coming in from their rear, .50 caliber machine guns and cannon raking the assault formations from behind. Men who had spent 2 hours trying to crack the American perimeter were caught in the open between the defenders they were attacking and the armor that had just arrived. The assault came apart. With the relief force closing the trap and the artillery and air still hammering them, the Viet Cong, who could still move, broke contact and ran for the tree lines, dragging what wounded they could. By the time the firing died down, the 4-hour battle was over. The morning sweep of the ground around fire support base Gold found 647 Viet Cong dead. 7 prisoners were taken. The burial details and the open paddy and the woodlines told the story plainly enough that the count, in a war famous for inflated body counts, was backed by physical evidence nobody could argue with. Estimates added at least another 200 enemy killed by the artillery and airstrikes whose bodies were carried off or never found. The 272nd Regiment had effectively been destroyed as a fighting unit. The Americans recovered 65 crew-served weapons and 94 individual ones from the field. American losses were 31 to 33 killed and around 190 wounded, a kill ratio of better than 20 to 1. The victory was not clean, and the men who were there never pretended it was. The base had been thrown together in 2 days. Parts of the perimeter had genuinely been overrun before the line was restored. The first hour was closer to disaster than the final numbers suggest, and it was the discipline of the gun crews and the timing of the armor, not the strength of the position, that turned it. A few minutes difference in when the tanks crossed that river, and the story of Suoi Tre might read very differently. President Johnson awarded the 3rd Brigade, 4th Infantry Division and its attached units the Presidential Unit Citation for what they did that morning. The artillerymen of the 2nd of the 77th, the riflemen who gave ground and then took it back, the tankers who came through the jungle, the pilots who never stopped working the woodlines. The 272nd Regiment was rebuilt the way these formations always were, with replacements walking down the trail from the Cambodian sanctuaries. Within a year it was in the field again. That was the hard truth under every American victory in Warzone C. You could win the battle completely, count the enemy dead by the hundreds, and still watch the survivors slip back across a border you were not allowed to cross, to be made whole and sent back. But on March 21, 1967, in a dry rice paddy near an abandoned village, a Viet Cong regiment bet that a half-built firebase full of fewer than 450 men was an easy target. They were wrong about almost everything inside that wire, and it cost them an entire regiment in a single morning. Thank you so much for watching until the end. If you loved this story, check out the other videos on your screen now. I think you'll really enjoy them. And don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already. See you in the next story.